are on a road trip, but that's not the purpose of this video. We are going to be working our way through John chapter 5 today, and I'm going to be throwing out some ideas that are out there that I think are worth you and your small group discussing. So let's just think for a moment about John chapter 5. As we've been working our way through the Gospel of John, we've seen, if we think about it as like a play or as a story, even though that's not really what it is, it does help us to think about this particular scenes that John tends to focus on. He is trying to show that Jesus truly is the Messiah to the Jewish people, and he's presenting enough proof from a theological perspective for those who would be reading this or hearing about it later on. So we have seen the interaction with Jesus and Nicodemus, his baptism. We have looked at the woman at the well. But now in John chapter 5, we are beginning to see some other miracles and some other signs that he's actually doing. So the big one throughout John chapter 5 is actually going to be the feeding of the 5,000. Now that was 5,000 men. It's not actually including the women and children who were probably a part of the group, which means that the number was actually much larger. Jesus feeds the 5,000 men. He asks Philip, what's it going to cost? And Philip gives an outrageous number that would basically be impossible for them to get that amount of money and that amount of food at that particular moment in time. But long story short, they find a boy. He's got 5 loaves, 2 little fish, and they're able to feed everybody who was there. I would say, as a small group, I really think that if you're the leader, have your group come up with a list of all the different ways that we see bread really create a central motif throughout Scripture. I mean, we can go all the way back and we start looking at Passover. They make unleavened bread. We see Jesus as the bread of life, manna from heaven, Elijah being fed by ravens, the widow and making bread for Elijah. There are several different ones. Why? Because bread is substance. Bread is what gives life, and that is the whole point. Is that idea that Jesus is life. Having a right relationship with God is life, and that Jesus is the one who is able to give us life. It also plays a lot into John chapter 4, where we were talking about the living water. So living water, the idea that water is moving, that God is providing for what would be a very basic need. So humans, we need water. We absolutely have to have it. We can't survive without it. We can go I think it's a couple days maybe without it, and we can go even longer without food, but we can't go very long without either of them. We can take the theological stance here that is why it's so important that we actively be involved in Scripture, that we're looking to it, that we are trying to have a plan, the same way we plan out our diets. We need to be able to have consistent nutrition. Then we go through, and that's the first part of chapter 5, and then you get in the second part of chapter 5, and then you get this little aside of Jesus calming the storm. Which, okay, so hear me out. I just think it's interesting in how John presents this, because we have this major motif of Jesus being the bread of life and God providing, and then we have this little aside that's really not that many verses, all things considered, and Jesus calms the storm and holds dominion over all nature. And you just see that this man from Nazareth holds dominion over creation. It blows my mind, to be perfectly honest. And then it's just these couple verses that hey, by the way, Jesus has control over the weather and is able to completely calm a raging sea. And then he went back to sleep. And then we go back to talking about the bread, because that's the next part of the chapter. Is we go back because Jesus traveled across. That's when he calms the sea, and then the people who he had previously fed then basically hunt him down, and they're we're going to make Jesus king, and which, by the way, really bad idea. The last time the people were king, 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 they got Saul. And then also keep in mind, historically, Israel is not currently like its own entity anymore. They are their own people group, and they are in their historic land, but they are ruled by Rome. And within Roman culture and within their society, like, they don't have kings. Like, that's why, like, you have Caesar. Like, Caesar was not king, Caesar was the emperor. Like, within their social context, there was a difference with that. King Herod was a tetrarch, which meant that he actually ruled like the Judean area under the authority of Caesar. So it wasn't so much that Herod was a king in and of his own rights, ruling over a kingdom. It was Herod was a king because the emperor said he could be a king, and if you tried to set up a king outside of that, then you were in open rebellion. So politically, it was a no-no. But Jesus also makes it very clear that, like, that's not the point. I'm not here for political rebellion. I'm not here to be that kind of Messiah. I'm here to save people from their sins. And so he disappears. I mean, there is definitely something to be said about Jesus choosing when to back down over something, and I would even say so much that he backs down. Jesus chooses to remove himself from situations that are not going to be conducive to his mission. And I think that is something that we can all learn. And if you wanted to, you could take this and ask your small group members, like, what are some situations where you've realized, like, it was better to remove yourself from that situation than to engage that situation? Because sometimes that really is the best move. And Jesus, like, addresses the people very directly about how you're not interested in me because you actually want, like, a king in the sense that they were wanting one. But when we're looking at it, though, from their perspective, a good king provides for the needs of their people. So a good king is going to be able to provide their people with food. A good king is going to be able to help provide them with medical attention. Like, that, isn't that what we look at when we're looking at governments? Like, what's considered a good government? And that's a question I really think that you should address in your small groups or your Sunday school class. And this is a good discussion question. Like, what is a good government? We tend to think from the American perspective, oh, well, we have a good government. Now, there's a lot of good things about the American government. There are a lot of bad things. I think we can all agree with that. But I think that is worth discussion, especially, like, if we are going to sit here and consider how the Jewish people were looking at this particular time. And Jesus reminds them that you're looking at me because I would be a good king because I'm able to do these things for you, but that's not my purpose for being here. And the Jewish people were looking at the here and now. They weren't looking long term, and they weren't really thinking of, okay, what does their Old Testament say? What is the purpose of the Messiah? What is the goal of him coming? It was to unite the people back with God in a right relationship. The Jewish people had been so far removed from, like, true covenant, I think, at this point, that, and we're talking multiple generations, that I don't think they really understood the heart of what their covenant was anymore. Now, they weren't looking at why they were worshiping. It had become greatly traditional, and even with all the laws that were put into place, because after all, like, John, he definitely sets up the Pharisees like they are the bad guys in his gospel specifically. They had even put into place, like, a lot of different laws, which the original purpose for all those laws outside of the law of Moses was so that way people wouldn't break them and they would stay with covenant. But instead, they basically put a noose around their necks with it. And I think true covenant had been lost. Now, John the Baptist, if we go back to him, I think he was fulfilling his calling. I think there was still people who truly understood covenant, but I think when we're talking about the culture as a whole, I think it had greatly been forgotten. And Jesus starts calling them back to this. They were getting back to like, this is what covenant means, and this is the Messiah, and this is the man that we have been waiting for, who's going to save us. I think that I went off a little bit of a tangent there, but I think those are things that are worth thinking about when we're looking at John chapter 5. These are my thoughts. Talk in your small group and see, like, what are some of the thoughts that they all have. Like I said, I would make a list of different ways that God is proving over and over again to be our sustainer, and that motif of being the bread of life, or just bread in general within the scriptures. I would take a look and talk about, like, okay, what do we consider to be a good government? It is a little bit of an aside within the general discussion that we were going with, but I think it's worth considering. And then what is the purpose of them having their view of covenant challenged, and who they are as a people challenged, and how did Jesus do that? So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it proves to be helpful for your small group. If you enjoyed this, make sure that you like and subscribe. Make sure you turn on all the notifications. That really helps out my channel, helps other people who might be interested in this find it, and I will look forward to seeing y'all again next week.